Welcome to yet another cubesys discussion series. Really pleased to be able to continue this and to keep adding value to all our AVD community. Today we're going to be looking at how we optimize AVD and how we can aim for efficiencies and cost savings. Let me just remind everybody how the format of the description of your work before I introduce you to the experts we've brought today. It is being recorded, as we just mentioned, so please be aware of that. We will, of course, have this on our website in future, so you can share it with your colleagues and friends. Do ask questions. We're comfortable for you to come off the mic and ask them verbally or stick them in the chat if you're a little bit shy. More than happy to address those. We'll keep an eye on them. And we do have those experts on hand to help out. And of course, all that video content will be sent to you afterwards. So we'll record all this and make sure you've got the slide deck, etc. afterwards. So on to our panelists for today. We've got Jared joining us from Nerdio. Nerdio is obviously, we're big fans of that at cubesys, and I'll explain why in a second. But Jared obviously is the account manager in Australia, main man, and comes with years and years of experience in VDI. Do you want to say a few words, Jared, and say hi to everybody?
Yeah, look, thanks, Paul. Thanks for the warm introduction. So yeah, probably I have to think it's probably 20 odd years in that end user computing space. So, from being, I guess, an end customer, managing an on-prem Citrix deployment, to being a consultant, to then working for Citrix, to then, back in the SI space and now working at Nerdio. And I've certainly seen how, sort of what was, terminal services to become to RDS to now where we are with AVD. So sort of seeing everything and the transition to cloud. So, we've sort of seen a lot of the pitfalls and the challenges, and really excited by the opportunity that's all in front of us with AVD. So thanks for that. And thanks for inviting me, Paul.
Yeah, and of course, everybody, I know quite a few people on the I can see there on the list is Nerdio users, and we all know that Nerdio does a great job around that cost efficiency. So we're keen to hear from you and see where you're heading as well. George, everybody probably knows you as well, but for those that haven't met you and for the broader audience, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So George Zakowski, one of the senior cloud consultants at cubesys. My background, probably following a little bit behind Jared there, I've got about 15 years experience in sort of end user compute VDI world. I've got a strong background in Citrix and VMware VDI environments. When AVD came to light, we quickly jumped on it here at cubesys. So primarily over the last couple of years, been doing a lot of AVD deployments and best practices, optimizations, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you guys got questions or anything concerning your environments, come off here, ask some questions. I'm sure Jared, Paul, and I can answer a lot of your questions. So yeah, that's me.
And of course, myself, everybody, CEO at cubesys. Cubesys has been involved with AVD right from the start, right, from the very early days before the pandemic. And on a personal level, I've been working in end user compute and SOE designs and Citrix and all those things for a good 20 years, right? So I've been plenty of experience. Not that I get on the tools anymore. I don't think the team allow me to do that, right? All good. So let's get started. I thought we'd start the conversation with just a reminder of everybody of the challenges of on-prem environments. For those that have already adopted AVD and looking for those efficiencies and making sure we're doing the right optimization things, it's easy to forget where we started and where some of those challenges are. So I thought we'd just recap those and check in on the fact that when we're on-prem and we have all that CapEx expense and we have to buy equipment and we're looking after that full stack of everything from the hosting and the connection brokers and load balancers, of storage and SAN. There's a whole lot of things behind VDI that are challenging, and it often may be quite challenging to bring it into organizations. And once you're in there, you're sort of set at a certain capacity, and it was hard to move from there, right? So those underlying physical restraints and infrastructure management pieces are all still challenges today when you're on-prem, and it's very easy to forget them when we're already in AVD and using that. I know Jared and George, you've probably got years of experience of dealing with those sort of challenges, right? And on-prem, got any war stories just to put a bit of colour into that context?
Yeah, I think from my side, when we used to build them on-prem, they were very much build it and they'll come. So there was a lot of that initial upfront investment was sort of required, and there had to be a really strong business case behind that. We had to do an awful lot of modeling around what it was going to cost. And then if we didn't end up with as many users as we thought we were going to end up with, obviously the cost per user actually goes up, because we've still paid for all of that infrastructure, all of that hardware, those sorts of things, right? Because that cost doesn't necessarily change because we've bought the licenses and done everything. But then equally, if there ended up being more users thrown onto the platform, we then might have to sort of squeeze more users into the small footprint that we did have as far as infrastructure, and that might impact performance of individual users, because we're trying to squeeze more out of what we've got, which then kind of doesn't go down the path that we want. But sometimes it's a necessary evil. So and not to say they were the bad old days, but it was definitely a lot harder to sort of achieve what we're able to do nowadays in that physical world, when you just couldn't forklift tin in on a regular basis to ensure that we could drive the performance and demand as well. So
yeah. Right. I remember those days of infrastructure management, trying to predict where your size and shape, and you were so locked in, by licensing contracts for 3 years. The kit that you needed to do, obviously, we need to put bombs together and order it and get it delivered and commissioned in our data centers and commit that resource and stuff. So way different to what we do in AVD. We see a lot, George, actually, don't we? We have clients actually just trying new scenarios. But it's so easy to try a new scenario in AVD. So that ability and flexibility that we have with cloud is very, very different.
I think one of the reasons as well why people are so open to trying new scenarios and whatnot compared to on-prem VDI is because you've bought this kit, and like Jared said, you've sort of spec'd it to size for what that particular use case is, and you don't really have room to expand, or you don't really have any true DR environments. Like a lot of customers that I've worked with in the past have had like a smaller DR environment where they can run like say 50% of the load, because it's just too expensive to go and buy all of this additional hardware and then rerun it. But then you've also got the other use case around, someone wants to go and try something. There's just no capacity there. So then you might need to run that in DR as sort of like a workaround, whereas a lot of those limits and capacity restrictions are lifted when you sort of go to the cloud, because you've sort of got, I guess, in a way, sort of infinite compute and storage that you can leverage. So, seeing a lot of people move away from on-prem VDI.
You can change that VM SKU, right? You can change your tactic if you want to put more users per VM, or you want to scale out or up. You can change your mind, right? And you just couldn't do that in the past, right?
Yeah. Well, let's not forget as well. Sorry, Jared, let's not forget as well that, AVD, although yes, it's, AVD is this big component where it eliminates all of the servers and, additional stuff that you need to manage on-prem. It's one of the key selling points as well is the Windows 10 multi-session, right? So it's the only place that you can get Windows 10 and a true end user experience, or Windows 11 for that matter. You can't get that on-prem, so you need to go down the cloud route if you wanted to go, multi-session Windows 11. Sorry, Jared.
No, I was only going to say, how many times did you have a particular CPU generation or something like that you couldn't buy that hardware anymore, right? So then you had to buy the next gen, then you were in some sort of mixed mode. With the cloud, we can really be really flexible, right? And just move to a new generation, or phase them in slowly and then phase the other one out. It really is for a lot of people do come back and, when they do the apples to apples comparison between on-prem and the cloud, and they're kind of still looking like, it's not a huge saving, maybe not necessarily, but it's all that additional flexibility that you do get. So it's definitely a much better place to be than sort of where we've come from.
Yeah. If you maybe one final comment on that total cost of ownership model there, obviously is all that stuff that we had to manage before, all those things that are now we just consume, and we don't have to worry about, like those load balancing and the connection brokers and all that sort of stuff. They all sat on servers that needed to be patched and managed and looked after, right? And that stuff you just forget about with AVD. So it's like way more flexible again. All right, so
I think that's one of the big points. Like when I was looking at on-prem infrastructure, it was traditionally, we'd look after pretty much 80-90% of the stack, and it wasn't up until we get to like switch firmware levels and that kind of stuff that we sort of offloaded that to other teams. But having the ability to just, brush all that off to the side and not have to worry about it, for me has been absolutely fantastic. Like it allows me to focus more time on actual, end user compute and making the user experience better for our end users essentially.
Good. So that's a bad old world, right? So what's different? Let's look at some efficiencies in cloud as we go there and where they're. So obviously we want to see that efficiency. They want to boost quality, and we've talked about how that flexibility can give us speed to respond to our businesses, try out new scenarios and but then obviously we want to make sure that cost is coming down or is controllable, right? So we've got a few comments there. Do you want to jump in, George, and get us started?
Yeah.
On
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, at the end of the day, depending on what you're looking to move to the cloud, whether it's a Windows 10, Windows 11 desktop experience, or if it's applications, the first thing is always right sizing your VMs, right? Ensuring that whatever number of users you're wanting to run on those VMs and the actual VM that's being provisioned is not over provisioned or under provisioned. You want to sort of right size it for the number of users. And that all comes down to things like SOE applications, what you're intending on running, whether you need GPU applications, whether your users are going to be running, databases, Excel spreadsheets with macros, that kind of stuff that might spike CPU and whatnot. And although that there are methods in there to, control, I guess, resource limiting in Windows 10 and 11, it doesn't always work quite well. So you need to be mindful of, right sizing those VMs and ensuring that they're optimal for your use case. And a lot of the time, what I recommend to, a lot of customers is look at running those optimizations, right? In AVD, you've got your basic Windows 10, Windows 11 optimization that goes through and removes a lot of the sort of services and applications and Apex packages that are sort of not necessary. But this is not something new. This has always been run, even on-prem environments. VMware have had their own optimization pack. Citrix have got their own ones. Microsoft have released their own ones now as well for AVD. So, hands down, look at applying some of those optimizations to get the best bang for your buck. Ensuring things like media redirection is turned on. I think some of the new features now of AVDs, having the ability to offload like, some websites that support it, like YouTube videos, for example, and offloading that to the end user's machine and having that render and play videos rather than the AVD host. And then that way you're not sort of bogging down the VM for your other users that could potentially be using it. And then finally, some of the other things there are, ensuring you've got the right number of users per session host, the right number of resources for, the number of users that you want to use, and then look at things like, monitoring those resources to ensure that, your CPU is not sort of hitting that hard limit for, X amount of time. You might get, your usual login storms and that kind of stuff, but generally speaking, throughout the day, monitor, have a look back, see, you might need to reduce the number of users per VM, or you may need to crank up the SKU of the actual VM to get, the better performance around that. They're generally a lot of the, I guess, efficiency type tasks for, running a nice, clean environment for your users and having the SOE run optimally. But then you've also got things like, cleaning up profiles and storage and any other tasks sort of in the background that are not really per se related to the actual VM itself, but, the other components that make up AVD, things like the monitoring metrics, log analytics, and I'll get into that a little bit later on, but, just ensuring that your environment is clean, efficient, it's running as needed, you're not using resources.
What I'm hearing from that conversation, George, is that all that housekeeping up here that we did at the operating system level and beyond is still needed, right? We shouldn't, just because the cloud doesn't magically fix that, we still need to focus on making sure those components are optimized as we would on-prem. What we've got is more flexibility there, but we still need to be on top of our game as support engineers and looking after the environment to make sure those efficiencies are addressed. So,
One thing go, Jared.
Sorry, I was just going to say there's still end users and there's still applications, right? Like that bit hasn't changed, like we changed the, maybe the delivery layer changed or the underlying infrastructure changed, but ultimately it's still end users ending up on a desktop. Those users open a web browser and then keep a whole bunch of tabs open and launch a bunch of either really great, well-written apps or a whole bunch of poorly written kind of legacy apps, which might be the whole reason why you're leveraging AVD and remote app or whatever in the first place. So let's not forget that a lot of the reasons why you're leveraging AVD may be because of some technical debt that you can't get away from, or some particular persona where really VDI is the only way that you can deliver that persona based if you're doing offshoring, partnering, remote working, a contractor workforce. There's always particular nuances with those use cases and making sure that we deliver those users a good experience. But as you were sort of alluding to before, spend less time worried about the underlying stack you know, and that shared responsibility model, and focus more on doing that actual optimization piece around the OS, the applications, the user profiles, the tuning of the OS, and then making sure we're sort of, as you have said, sort of right sizing the environment. Whilst there's some metrics that are out there, there's not one tick box, not one switch, not one particular thing that you can do. It's really that kind of multiple layers, and you have to sort of apply a lot of different approaches to get to that kind of golden state, and then continue to sort of iterate as you work through.
Yeah,
These operational engineers now are able to focus in on that end user compute experience and that value there, rather than looking at that whole stack that we talked about. And you know, George was alluding to earlier how much time you had to look into all those other pieces in the past. Now we can really focus in on optimizing that efficiency inside the operating system in that Windows 10 multi-session.
One other thing as well that I think a lot of people don't sort of look at in terms of efficiency is how your users are actually using the environment, right? I see a lot of people that have really big like RDP timeout periods. So someone might log in the morning, close a remote app, and then their session is active until the end of work hours when sort of the environment scales down. I'll get into it a little bit later on, but having that user session there, sort of, you know, locking out someone else who could potentially be active and, you know, using the environment. You also need to look at some of those, you know, RDP timeouts and sort of be a little bit more strict around that, because if someone's going to go to lunch and then forget to log in, you don't want that session sort of hanging around and being in sort of an unknown state, you know, for majority of the time, when you could have actually had someone, you know, that's actively using it on there, responding to, you know, using the correct resources, that kind of stuff. So that's
a balancing act, isn't it? It's about guys understanding your own business and what's there. Like if I think to some of our healthcare clients, for example, where clinicians are there, that interaction to get on and get the medical notes quickly, or the drugs that they're prescribing quickly get that interface is really key to their efficiency as a clinician, right? And so technology doesn't want to get in the way; it needs to be there. So the sessions are often, you know, we take the hit on the sessions length because it's more important for that business to have that interactivity and be able to move quickly for the patients.
And with all that, I mean, it all comes down to monitoring, right? You know, you're not going to get it right on the first go. You need to monitor your environment for a couple of months and see what your users are doing in there, and then make adjustments. There's no silver bullet to go in there and say, you know, 100%. Yes, you can implement your best practices and whatnot, but those might not work for your environment. You may need to shift it slightly to get the best bang for buck and essentially the best user experience for your end users. But yeah, they're generally the things that we sort of look at to deploy and monitor on and see where we can, you know, move to the future after deploying.
Let's get a bit more technical and probably what the guys here were expecting from this call. And let's start with a really obvious one, right? Obviously, if we're going to be efficient in AVD and control costs and give a good user experience and balance that, first thing, the obvious thing is that we've got to talk about auto scaling, right? And we're going to talk about auto scaling about the compute layer, right? And so let's hit that one out of the park first, and then we'll talk about some more other options we can talk about there.
Yeah, sure. Look,
the scale, right? And I think it's the scale in bit that's really key, right? That we if we want to be cost efficient, right, we need to make sure that scale in stuff works well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, looking at the chart there, I mean, you really want to be sort of in that bottom left diagram where you're scaling up as demand comes on and scaling back down as demand drops. So, you know, you have your users going to lunch, you want these sessions to be, you know, disconnected or logged off if that's the case. And then you essentially want those VMs to be powered off and scaled back down. That's where you're going to be saving a lot of your costs. Running VMs in Azure is the most costly. You're paying for compute as you use it. When the VMs are shut down, you're only paying for the storage of the disks, right? You can take that a step further and, you know, delete the VM completely and do like a provision on demand, and we'll get into that in another slide. But primarily, that's where a lot of your cost savings are, and you need to have all of the right auto scaling set up as a general, you know, starting baseline. You need to make sure that you know your users are logging in at 9 a.m. You want to have, you know, 10, 20 VMs ready, pre-provisioned for those users to log in. And then during the day, as they're using it, you want the environment to shift and scale accordingly so that you can save a lot of your money during that time. Anything you want to add there, Jared, from your, I guess your...
It's the excel of this area, right? And so they should use a lot of it, they add value, right? So I'm sure Joe's got plenty to say, right?
Yeah. Look, I know there's probably one or two customers on the call that are always looking for more features in autoscale to meet their specific requirements. But look, I think everyone that knows what capabilities are there natively in the AVD2 tool set, and I think whilst they can work in a lot of scenarios, I'd say that they're fairly agricultural is probably the term that I'd use as far as their approach. And without then creating your own, what I kind of call Franken scripts to then sort of kind of build on top of the native capability. Obviously we've sort of taken autoscale and sort of we tried to make it our own as far as adding a lot of the capabilities that the majority of customers are sort of looking for to not only do that scale out, as you sort of have said, and really scale out as needed, as opposed to having to kind of over provision and pre-provision and have just kind of stuff waiting there ready to go, but also being able to tune that scale in approach so that we can get potentially progressively more aggressive with how we scale in. Because one of the scenarios, and this is probably also more maybe an architecture piece around the size of your virtual machine. So and probably it sort of reflects in those diagrams that you've got there that I think when we were originally sort of doing VDI and multi-session machines and potentially even on-prem, maybe when we were tied to Windows licenses or we didn't want to manage as many Windows VMs, we'd tend to try and pick a really large, I guess, machine, and I'll call it a building block, for want of a better term. And then obviously if say that building block takes 20 users, sort of thing, and I use that as my building block to build out my host pool, then if, for example, I only need a single another session to come on, then I'll power on a machine that can host 20 users, right? And I'm not really getting my bang for buck out of that machine until there's another 19 users on the machine. Equally, when I go to shut down a machine, at the end of the day, if there's just one user left on a machine that can host 20 users, equally that one user is costing me more resource. So we tend to find nowadays that those smaller against instance sizes and using those smaller building blocks allows us to react more sort of linearly to kind of demand as it moves up, and equally as we're able to sort of scale back down, we're able to sort of shut down machines more rapidly and leave a lot less kind of resource powered on at the end of the day.
And even from the on-prem world, isn't it, where we would try and cram as many users as we could onto a VM. Now we actually want smaller building blocks because we want to scale out rather than up, and let that auto scaling take care of that for us.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not, whilst it's probably not such a thing around the compute saving side of things, it's probably more that, and there's other benefits of it too, right? You kind of reduce your blast radius. So if you've got a noisy neighbor on a particular machine that is only impacting a smaller number of users, if a user manages to have a dodgy application or kill the print spooler or whatever, those historic things that we had issues with in the past, if that still creeps into your environment due to whatever sort of legacy you may have, that'll only impact those users. So there's other side benefits to that. And then equally on the Nerdio front, obviously we do have the ability that if you want to get really aggressive with your scale in, then essentially at the end of the day, say for example, you've got 10 machines still powered on, but only 20 users, and the users are kind of spread across those 10 machines and keeping them all open, but each machine will take 10 users, then essentially what Nerdio will attempt to do is actually squeeze those 10 machines down to 2 machines to host those 10 users by prompting the users on machines where there might be only one user on a machine to log out, log back in, and sort of drain them down. So we can really try and sort of screw down that cost. You may not want to do that for every single host pool, and you may not want to do that on day one of releasing your new AVD solution. But if you're really wanting to sort of drive down the cost of the solution and continue to drive continuous improvement in your platform, then they're the sorts of features that you can sort of light up to sort of try and show value and show cost savings as well.
And having seen by the rudimentary approach to auto scaling that you can get from the native platform, and then seeing where you've gone from even 2 years ago where you were was great and added a lot of value, but you keep improving that and keep making it more sophisticated and allow for more scenarios in that auto scaling realm. You really can get into quite complex scenarios now that we can address and let the system look after it. So we set it and let it look after it with video, right? And that's
we'll talk a bit about futures and roadmap maybe at the end, but there's definitely some stuff on the roadmap around our Nerdio Advisor capability around sort of looking at each host pool in your environment, looking at the persona and the use cases and looking at how they're being used. And then in the future, because we do, for example, we've released some new intelligence features around monitoring when users are actually logging in to actually look to do some intelligent pre-staging. So, some of that stuff, you've got to read our release notes and understand that that's going to have an impact. But, essentially letting Nerdio kind of notify you and say, hey, this new feature's available. It looks like it could probably apply to, 5 or 6 out of maybe 10 host pools you've got in your environment. So really trying to kind of keep that continuous improvement approach moving, as well as just informing you of sort of new features that are going to have an impact in that auto scale.
Some exciting stuff coming, right? So let's
there is a lot.
We'll dive into that in a couple of slides, but let's so we've addressed the obvious, right? That we need to also scale our compute, right? And I think everybody on the call would have expected that, right? But what else can we do? What else can we do to efficiency? So we've got some other notes. Let's start here. I've got a couple of slides here with different areas to look at, but let's start with just-in-time provisioning, profile optimization, and storage. Right? Where do you want to start, George, with this?
Look, I think we just start top left there. So just-in-time provisioning means just exactly what it is. So, we may have a host pool that's got 10 base VMs because we know that we're going to get X amount of users, and that sort of accommodates for those users. But if we want to burst out or get more people on the platform, that's where we use just-in-time provisioning, where we provision VMs on demand. Not only is that going to save on costs when the VMs are powered off, because if we have 10 VMs powered off versus having the over provision of 20 VMs all powered off, you're essentially doubling your cost because you're still paying for those disk costs, right? So just-in-time provisioning there can help us to pretty much lower the cost of running VMs and lower the cost of the VMs when they're shut down. So although it's not there natively today, Nerdio does have that feature called burst beyond VMs. You can go into a host pool and manually set it and say, we know that we're going to expect a little bit more load today. Let's provision an additional 5 or 10 VMs for the host pool for the duration of this, and then scale it back down. And you can, use PowerShell or whatever to go and try and script that if need be. But yes, that's what just-in-time provisioning is. And then we talk about some of the things that, people don't really look into too much, which is like profile optimization. So let's think of a scenario here. If we're using NetApp files or Azure files, we're paying for the overall storage costs, right? We have users that log in. By default, the profiles are set to grow up to 30 gig. We have users that jump on board, they use the environment, they never log in again, right? They might not have a need for it, but yet we're storing their profile there. They've probably got 5-10 gigs worth of storage. Or we have people that have left the organization and no one's gone in and cleaned up those resources. So looking at, ensuring that we're deleting user profiles that are no longer needed. Nerdio's got an option to shrink profiles. You could also shrink them manually with, FSLogic scripts and that kind of stuff. Nerdio's just got a one-button click and it'll go and do it for you. But yeah, basically clearing out any stale objects, ensuring that you're only paying for the storage that you need. You're not always just adding storage and adding storage and adding storage, right, to meet that demand. You should go in there every few months and just have a look and see, which profiles haven't been used, when was the last access time, delete them, that kind of stuff. And there's all these different PowerShell scripts that you can find on the internet that can do it for you as well if you're storing your profiles elsewhere. A lot of customers use NetApp files and they run a script on like a management box that'll go through and sort of delete that, compressed profiles isn't needed, that kind of stuff. Sorry, Joe?
Yeah, probably on that profile part, like it's not even necessarily from the Nerdio perspective, but just a personal observation just in the industry. There was a in previous, lives when, we didn't have as faster performance storage, or we weren't doing, VHD mounting of sort of profiles, which kind of gets around some of the limitations. We used to spend a lot more time and effort kind of focusing on inclusions and exclusions and all of this sort of stuff to really tune down the user profile and really try and make it quite light, because we were kind of hampered by the performance of the underlying technology, or relying on a filer that we can't always guarantee the IOPS that we're going to get from it. So we had to kind of really be specific around that. And I think things like FSLogic, whilst they've been great technologies, they've kind of let us get a little bit lazy, because we just capture everything and kind of get away with the fact that it does this, brilliant kind of mounting, and, it does its thing. But by then it's just led to this kind of, explosion of just resource consumption, which, look, if you're happy with that and you want to retain everything in the profile and you're happy to keep throwing storage at it, you can continue, right? It is ultimately the cloud. It will continue to scale. But I think doing that stuff up front can really be something that you can kind of miss out on a project, because it's a lot harder to retrospectively go back and do a lot of that cleaning up, because it's a lot of initial work to do it. It's like if you just kind of try and get it a bit, you know, lighter up front, it can just, you know, from a, especially if you're scaling out to a really large environment, it just saves a lot of rework in the long run, and it's less time needing to compact and do all of that sort of stuff. So not even necessarily related to the technology, it's more about just some of that health and hygiene stuff up front, which just saves you a headache in 12 months time.
So what I'm hearing from you too is that we've still got housekeeping to do, right? And just because we've got the flexibility of cloud doesn't mean that we should just take it for granted. It does need some time and effort on there, and that has a direct impact on cost, right? And so
you're not spending time patching a whole bunch of Windows boxes for web interfaces and storefronts and doing this and doing that. It's like, spend the time doing these other things, right? Which is then going to ultimately and make the environment more efficient, because it will slow things down. Even though you can keep throwing storage at things, then if you want to do a cleanup, like that takes time, because it's then got to essentially mount each profile and sort of roll through. So definitely something that's,
to me, that one of the good things, we'll talk a bit about this later on as well, is that the ability to report on things and see things in cloud is so much more granular than we were capable of before, right? So we'll touch on that a little bit later on. Cool. So news around profile optimization is we've got some homework to do, right? And we've got to do our hygiene and housekeeping. All right, that's good. What about storage optimization, George? There's some different advice there, or some extra advice?
Look, it's pretty much what's on the screen there. I mean, you know, if you've got an SOE that's only using 60 gig, don't go you can actually shrink, manage this down from 128 gig down to whatever, you know, your OS is, and then save that and deploy that out. So that's one way to save costs. Typically in Australia East, to run a 128 gig premium SSD, I think is about $25 a month per VM per disk. Sorry, per disk, not per VM, or I guess both in a way. You can, you know, shrink that in half. Looking at premium SSD is definitely a good way. When you go multi-session, you want your performance to be great. You also want so that's the VM performance. You also want the profiles to be on very fast storage as well, right? So you need to consider IOPS and that kind of stuff. One thing I just wanted to quickly add in terms of profile optimization is when you were talking about profiles in the past, Jared, so like you take Citrix, for example, what a lot of people used to do was pull user documents, desktop and whatnot in one area, and then the actual application settings in the other area. So that way, when there was an issue with whatever, help desk can come in and, you know, reset a profile, and then that way they don't lose their data. The best way to do this in the VDI world now is obviously to use FSLogix and, you know, have your profile mounted as a VHD, but then at the same time using OneDrive with files on demand. That way, when you do go blow away someone's profile because an application's causing issues or whatever, when they go to log back in again, all of their files, desktop documents, whatnot, sync already there, and they can just double click it. And because it's in Azure, we should have line of sight to, you know, where the OneDrive files are. It should be lightning fast to pull those back down to the user profile when needed. So just a real quick.
There should be a lot less of a reason to need to maintain those profiles like we used to. Like we used to kind of hold them like they were gold. You know, there should be enough pre-configuration and policy and automation and just seamless kind of login, you know, experience where you don't have to recreate all this stuff. You know, favorites and all of those sorts of things should all be kind of retained elsewhere, not in the Windows profile.
That's why FSLogix give you that exclude/redirect file that you can sort of throw in the root of your, you know, your profile storage, and then you can, you know, remove things or shuffle them around or whatnot. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So around storage optimization, just making sure that you know, your VMs are right size, your OS disk is, you know, as small as possible. Looking at things like you know, your profile storage, and ensuring that that's the actual total size is as close as possible to the actual usage and intended usage. You know, not over provisioning, that kind of stuff. So they're sort of some of the ones that you can do there.
On the storage front, obviously with that storage optimization, you know, for any existing customers or anyone that's probably seen a presentation from us, you know, as you sort of said, premium SSD is really where even Microsoft recommends around sort of for performance, certainly for multi-session and even for sort of high performance single users. So, you know, the ability to be able to dynamically make that disk selection change. You know, we actually had one customer that, you know, they have $1 million worth of managed disk cost every year. and in a multi-session environment. And by enabling a couple of features inside Nerdio, where when we shut the machine down, we convert the drive back to a spinning disk, which ultimately doesn't really change much. It doesn't move the storage, but it's just changing the SKU and removing the IOPS guarantee off the drive. And we could save that customer 40% on their disk cost, right? That's $400,000 on their
massive.
Azure bill, right? Which is huge, right? So, and it's just a couple of checkboxes in the product.
Yep.
Equally around profile storage, Nerdio can actually manage Azure files or Azure NetApp files on your behalf. So, allows you to, instead of, okay, over provision, talked a bit about over provisioning before, which is kind of the killer when it comes to cost, when you've still only got a small number of users on the platform. So, instead kind of setting up some guardrails and setting a low watermark and a high watermark in your storage account, and let sort of Nerdio manage that, or some other automation, but something like Nerdio manage it. And then as you are adding more users to the platform, just incrementally adding new storage as it's needed, as opposed to kind of, as I sort of use the analogy, build the church for Christmas Eve, kind of build it as big as we think it's going to get. It's like, instead, let's set these sort of guardrails and then let Nerdio kind of manage that and self-tune. And in addition to that, we can actually monitor the latency of the disk as well. So it might just not be a capacity consideration, because we all know a lot of the time we've got to have more capacity in a storage account or anything to really get the IOPS that we need, because we need more disks to share that IOPS load. So, monitoring the latency of that storage account, and potentially adding more capacity if the latency, hits a certain threshold. So, whilst it's not necessarily a cost optimization piece, because adding more storage costs you more money, but that could be a period of time where you have an outage or a denial of service of end users because they can't log in. So instead of over provisioning to kind of guarantee service, instead kind of, set it up so that you're actually, making sure that you're just only assigning as much as you need to kind of do it, and really use that as your optimization approach.
Right, guys, I'm going to move on some time, and then I want to get some of those new features and things that are coming down the roadmap. But just to summarize storage optimization, right size it, guys, right size it, and we should be looking at automation in storage as well as in the compute, right? So there's lots of smart things we can do in the storage and automation to keep us efficient and save costs, right? And there's obviously housekeeping is still on my cards for us. Right, next slide. We got some different areas here where we can talk about personal VDIs, log analytics, and reserved instances, obviously, and saving plans. Let's get started with that one.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest cost saver here is personal VDIs and just not using them, right? That's probably the biggest one. You want to move towards multi-session where possible, but if personal VDIs are required, then they're there. We can't get around them. We have to maintain that. And as Jared was saying earlier, around the whole disk swap, when the VMs are not in use, convert that disk to like a standard hard drive, while the user's not using it, they convert it back to a premium, can help saving those costs. But at the same time, you want to look at things like your timeout sessions. When is the VM powered on? When is it powered off? Nerdio have got a new feature where you can allow the user to spin up a different SKU and then drop that SKU back after a certain amount of time. And that's all of the more advanced stuff. But just typically talking, generally about personal VDI machines, again, you don't want to over provision. It's one person using that machine, and if they're using 100% capacity of the machine, well, either the application's probably not the best for it, or if it is as expected, then we want to look at moving up to a different SKU and providing more memory, looking at some of them more optimized. You've got CPU optimized machines, you've got memory optimized machines. Don't just go and use like a D series VM or something like that. Go out and actually have a read and see sort of what you can optimize, and obviously throwing a lot of those Windows optimizations on there will help give you a little bit more performance on those machines as well.
Yeah, it's an area that reminds me that we often in the world of VDI and DAOs and things, we're always talking about personas and use cases and things, and I think that's really important with personal VDIs. We do need to do a bit of extra homework then and make sure we line it up, because it is costly on that. And then it raises questions like, where does Windows 365 come in? If it's on all the time, then is Windows 365 a better option for us? Do we put that into the mix? But I would say there's also times when AVD will still be a really good solution for personal VDI. I know we've got a client that has to do a couple of days of heavy number crunching at the end of the month, and they just need some high compute. We don't want to be paying for the whole month of Windows 365 for that. We just need it for those 2 days, and that's where AVD comes in and solves that problem. So we really do need to think about those personas and use cases when we look at VDI and personal VDIs, and pay them extra attention, because they do need a bit more, because they are more expensive than multi-session.
One other thing as well is with personal VDIs, what I'm seeing is a lot of people are provisioning personal VDIs because they've got some sort of workload that needs to run for extended period of time, right? Now, it says there, if possible, use start VM on connect, which basically says, if the VM's powered off, let's have the AVD service power the VM for us. But if they're going to be running workloads that last 2-3 days long, right, and they go on leave and they forget the VM, who's going to shut it down? What's going to shut it down? Nerdy has got the capability. Unfortunately, native does not. However, there are other ways to get around that, right? You can put like a scripted action in there, or a Windows task scheduler to say, after 3 days, prompt the user, is the VM running? If not, shut it down, and then have like another script in Azure to go ahead and deallocate the VM so that you're not paying for those costs. But just keep that in mind when it comes to personal VMs, because I know that a lot of the use cases are for those sort of long running workloads, and having that VM always on and available. And like Paul said, maybe looking at Windows 365 might be an alternative for some of those users. But if they want a GPU or something like that, then you're stuck with Azure Virtual Desktop and going down that route. That log analytics optimization component there, the biggest thing, and the thing that I see where users sort of don't go and tweak, is the number of days that the log retention stays in there, right? So log analytics is logging everything that is applicable to your environment. Typically 30 days, 60 days is probably at most one of the best, because it's logging who launched an application, what time they've logged in, any errors, that kind of stuff. Do you really need to know, what happened beyond 2 months? If there was some sort of security breach or something like that, surely you would have picked that up between those timeframes. You can go longer if you want, but just be mindful. Don't leave it out too long. Don't leave 100 days worth. Sorry, not 100 days, a year's worth, because those costs do add up, and you're essentially paying money for just a whole bunch of logs. So yeah, that's one thing that a lot of people don't look at. And then the last one down the bottom there is the reserved instances. So a lot of customers don't go down the route of reserved instances. I don't know why we always recommend them. If you're going to be using AVD, go and buy 10 reserved instances for a specific SKU, because no doubt you'll have 10 VMs running, right? It's going to save you in the long run. Nerdy has actually got a really good calculator inside their tool that will go and tell you roughly how many reserved instances of what SKU you should get, and rough cost savings and that kind of stuff. So that can help if you're a Nerdy customer. If you're not, reserved instances will pretty much give you like 50-60% discount over 3 years or something like that. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it does give you that. And if you're expecting to use AVD beyond a year, 2-3 years, hands down, go and have a look at reserved instances, because they will save you cash.
Particularly if you've got that 24/7 or high usage in your environment, right? Because you're going to have something running. If you've got something,
100%,
you should be leveraging the reserved instances. Anything to add, Joe? Because I'm again conscious of time. We've got a couple more slides.
No, look, I think George sort of covered everything on the log analytics front. It's also about that fidelity and frequency of what you're storing in those logs as well. Like, there's a lot of stuff that gets logged. It's not just about the retention, it's also about what's being logged in there, because a lot of the time, we're reporting on stuff, or doing it every 30 seconds, when you might say, hey, I'm okay with that every 5 minutes. So in a really large environment, you can actually tune some of that down. Like, if you're really trying to get down into the weeds of it, there's definitely some optimization there. And look around reserved instances. I think everyone looks at that initially and does a whole bunch of modeling, and might even sort of purchase some up front, as you've kind of alluded to there. I think a lot of the time it's actually better to go pay YG, because as much as we think we know how users are going to sort of use things, then a lot of the time it's better to just really see when the rubber hits the road, and actually, especially if we're coming from on-prem, to cloud, and it's the first time we're kind of running in an auto scale world, we might think that we're only going to use it for 8 hours or whatever, but that might change. So I think letting an environment run for a period of time and then making some decisions makes more sense. And as you said, we've got reserved instance analytics built into the product, and certainly, obviously, Azure savings plans have been coming up more and more. And I keep raising it with the product team. They keep telling me it's on the backlog. So there's a good chance we're going to see something change there. And certainly we'll chat a bit more about some stuff in the future.
Well, let's jump onto the next slide to summarize, and then we can start talking about some of those future developments and where you're heading. I think some really great stuff coming out of Nerdio, and I know we've on this particular sort of subject, when we talk about cost optimization and efficiency, it's hard not to when we sort of embedded with what we see from Nerdio, right? And this such okay, the top one item there, VM power management, you're going to do that anyway, right? We talked about that before. So maybe this is a bit of a marketing slide at that 83% savings there, right? But yes, you're going to do some of this stuff anyway with scripts or with the native tooling Microsoft, but then Nerdio takes it to the next level, right? It gives that sophistication and additional benefits around there, right? And
it's even less about Nerdio, even though this is a Nerdio slide, it's even less about this. It's just, look, if you would take that one approach and you just do VM power management, you're effectively going to save 57%, especially if you're really efficient. But this just really sort of shows that cost optimization in AVD is not just about VM power management for compute. You need to layer multiple cost reduction strategies on top of VM power management to really drive down the cost per user in the platform, and overall obviously drive down the cost of AVD. So you shouldn't just kind of do VM power management, do auto scale and go tick, I've done that, cost optimization done, or only focus on that as your method of continuous improvement. It's like, no, you need to look at these multiple layers and apply multiple strategies, because they all incrementally save money, especially in large environments where, a little saving actually adds up to be a lot. You really need to be looking at, making sure you're covering off these multiple layers and kind of have some ownership around potentially those layers, so that you have a team or a person that kind of manages that and make sure that those tasks are happening ongoing to really drive down the cost. But yeah, certainly this is if anyone's ever done a presentation with us, they've probably seen the slide before. So yeah.
Well, that layered strategy is the key takeaway there. But tell us, we've got some enhancements coming from Nerdio. We mentioned beginning of the webinar, the advisor piece and some more. Dive into it. Tell us what's coming around the corner from Nerdio.
So Nerdio Advisor is kind of going to be the combination of a whole bunch of different sort of capabilities you sort of alluded to. We've got things like reserved instance analytics and various things that we've kind of built sort of on their own and have kind of been features in the product. So the first edition, which is actually in the product today, is essentially what we're calling the modeler. So instead of needing to actually jump into a spreadsheet or go to a website to actually do your modeling around your AVD deployment or your host pools, you can actually do your modeling directly inside the Nerdio console. So you can pick a persona, pick a use case, this many hours a day, this many days a week, heavy user, light user, and start to kind of piece together what your persona is going to look like.
You can go,
you can do that and do a bit of A/B comparison and those sorts of things.
Or
what will it cost me to do?
New requirement from the business, right? And they want, I don't know, some engineering workload over here, or the need there's a different host pool. I can actually go and predict what that's
just quickly model it up actually directly inside Nerdio, and it'll pull everything from Azure, obviously based on the instances that are available to you, those sorts of things. Now, obviously that's step one, which we're calling the modeler. Now, after that, and this will be in a future release, is going to be the ability to actually do a click deployment of then that host pool. So if you said, okay, I'm now comfortable with that cost, what you would normally then do is, if you'd done it in a spreadsheet or done it somewhere over there, you'd have to build that host pool, develop an auto scale policy that aligned with the hours per day and the different sort of metrics that you put in. The intention there is to be able to just auto deploy that for you, so that baseline
the system
and auto configure. So it's already there. Yep. So you just pick, obviously you still need to create an image or select an image to build that host pool off, but you can effectively just get it to build out for you, build the number of hosts that you need, set the timers, those sorts of things. So that would all be done for you. And then the next two steps that are sort of coming and will kind of blend everything together is really that continuous optimization piece around, okay, now I've deployed the host pool. What is the reality of now running that host pool in my environment? How are users actually using it? And how does that then compare back to that original model that I put together? And we've all had this scenario where, we've done this great modeling here and then we've actually deployed, and it's either costing more or whatever it might be. So we can then either look at, what optimizations can we do to help either drive down the cost, or, what are we observing in that in the usage of that host pool that we're seeing the users they're using it for 16 hours a day instead of 14 or whatever it might be. And then, as George kind of said, is there then an operational or a organizational change element to kind of changing then how users use it? Maybe there might not be, because it just turns out that that's actually how they use the system, but that'll inform that for you more. And then the fourth piece that's sort of and the one that we're probably most excited about is really, as you've probably seen in the last 12 months, I think we released about 100 new features in our product. So, and how can you possibly keep across every new feature and how that one feature might align to a particular persona or use case or host pool in your environment. So essentially being able to auto sort of notify you to say, hey, you've got these 10 host pools in your environment. Of the 4 that you've got that are personal VDI host pools, this new feature from Nerdio might be able to sort of save you costs and then model what that will sort of look like. So that's really where
you guys have way too many features, right? And so
actually
getting back and re-optimizing that system and taking advantage of those smarts, right, is actually quite, it's a lot, does just awareness of it and knowing. So you're saying the system's going to point out the obvious ones and go, hey, this feature is going to help you here, right? Are you interested?
That's where we want to get to. So, and you know, I think we started on this journey about, probably 6 months ago, and probably it was a little bit early since all the AI and chat GPT stuff's come along. So you can probably kind of see where we're going to start to be headed with that sort of technology. And whilst the concept has all been there and it was traditionally going to be kind of mind map type workflow piece, there's now a bit more thought around what we can actually do around some of the new things that have really come to market more recently. And there's been a bunch of new hires in the team, and we're all really excited around what that stuff's going to look like. So definitely, if you're a customer today, definitely check out the modeler. As Paul said, especially if you're looking to add a new host pool or do something, you can actually kind of model it up and very quickly see what that might look like. And then equally, you should start to see more features come under that banner of Nerdio Advisor over the next few months, which are really going to help to sort of drive those cost optimizations and operational efficiency in your AVD environment.
Yeah, great. So it's good to see that type of technology being thought about and in the roadmap, right? That's awesome. And today we can go and leverage that modeler, but more coming and more prompts to make sure that we keep on top of that optimization, keep leveraging the benefits of new features and capabilities. Right, that's awesome news. I know we're running out of time, going over by a little bit, and I'll be in trouble from my team, but did actually also want to point out Cloud Clarity, which is a product from cubesys that we deliver with Power BI connector to be able to analyze all those costs and things. So I think to round out that story around cost optimization efficiencies, to have the metrics to measure yourself and go back. And we're actually finding with some of the analytics inside of Power BI as we're sort of enhancing our templates that we provide to clients as part of that connector services, you can drag all that data out from AVD, and we can connect it to your business data, so we can look at your cost centers and individual users and things like that. But it also starts to mirror and be a self-check, and it sort of closes the loop with some of the operational tasks and efficiencies we're talking about, because we can see when people log on, right? Because we track every single session, how much that costs. We can then see where those peaks are, and then we can make sure the optimization is correct, and you've got like a self-check there. And things like that storage optimization we talk about. If you see the storage costs changing, you'll be able to track that and see the trend, and then go and analyze why that's happening and look into it. So this tool isn't just about the interface to the business and having an adult conversation about what it costs to run AVD and being very transparent with that, which is wonderful. But also as a BAU operations team, it can be a self-check, right? And we can start to see alerts. One of the things we've got on our roadmap for that is to leverage Power BI's trend analysis and analytics, where predictive analytics, so we can see where those costs are trending to and see if we can pick up anything in there. That's one of the things we'll be looking at. But that was just a small piece I wanted to tag on the end there to say that we got that capability within Cloud Clarity, and that's matured quite a lot in the last few months. Okay, we have run over time. Let me I'll just say I'll jump to the. I don't know if we've been answering questions I can see in the chat and lots of things going on there. Do keep them going, and you're more than welcome to send us questions after the session as well. And there's contact details for us there as always, but I think a lot of you might know who we are and where to get in touch with us. So please do ask questions about that sort of stuff. I know Jared's always keen to talk about the new features coming from Nerdio and all that optimization work that they're doing. And really just a thank you again for another session. One last question I just saw come in there. Let me just read that, and then we might close out. Network bandwidth, do you assign a user? And Chris, so George, I'll let you answer that one on the network connectivity stuff. We can ping Peter and close that out. And Chris Downing there, now that's a good question. So, Cloud Clarity without Nerdio? Yes, you can. But we've also OEMs part of that technology and Cloud Clarity inside of Nerdio. So if you've got Nerdio Premium, then you can leverage that at the starting of that and have that built inside your console. So you have one pane of glass from Nerdio to be able to see those Cloud Clarity figures and user costs. So that's a really great starting point. The Power BI connector though is available as an addition to that or separately, right? So you can use that by itself if you like, right? And connect that data back out into Power BI. Cool. Any final comments, guys, before we close out? It's been hopefully it's been a useful session to everybody. Yeah, all good.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
thanks everyone for running. It was very handy.
Awesome. I'm glad that's helpful, guys. And thank you for joining. We'll be back in touch, I'm sure, next month with another session and looking at what else we can talk about in AVD. All right. So keep in touch. And thank you for attending.
Excellent.